All right, I've renamed this presentation How to Survive and Thrive in the Feedback Economy. Sounds very grandiose, doesn't it? Maybe we'll start by talking about what I mean by feedback economy. So I look out on the landscape today and I see a few really important trends, and one that's been around as long as humankind. The first trend is just total transparency. Transparency of the web, social, anything that can be known today will be known. And so that's one thing that's happening in the world. Another thing is, if you think about consumer expectations for experiences have gone through the roof. We're all spoiled by modern technology, and we all expect more from our products, from our services, and so forth. And then the third thing I'd layer in here is the age-old desire of humans to be heard, to be valued, to be understood. People want to share their opinions. So when you combine these things, transparency, this desire for heightened experiences, and human nature, desire to be heard, we're drowning in feedback. There's just this total proliferation of feedback. And my view is that we have to be listening into that, because that feedback can either boost your business or it can tank it. If you don't believe me, believe our research scientist team. So we're very fortunate at SurveyMonkey to have a whole host of researchers who are constantly looking at trends out there. And they've run the research and found out that 85% of people who have a good experience with your products and services are likely to write a review. On the flip side, 81% of those who have a bad experience are likely, not even, they might, they're likely to write a review. And even the people in the middle who are kind of like, meh, it was all right, half of them will write something. So this is the world that we're living in. Definitely pays and is important to lean in to that feedback. Now, the next slide makes me a little sad, especially as a marketer. How many marketers do we have in the room? Are people responsible for marketing? Okay, guys, I hate to break it to you, but we're just not that credible anymore. So all this feedback is out there. We should be listening to it, understanding pain points, challenges, what our customers need. And the reality is 60% of people say that we're marketing them things that they don't need. So to my mind, that means we really have to listen in and get into that feedback. So I'm going to share 7 sort of ideas on how you can really leverage feedback in this feedback economy to drive growth, to drive innovation, to accelerate your business. They're stories that are taken from my time at OpenTable, at Lever, SurveyMonkey, LinkedIn, and also from some of our customers that I find most inspiring. So let's crack on. First tip, using feedback to inform your biggest messaging decisions. One of the things I love about marketing is it's part art, part science. The science part, we're getting better at measuring. There's all manner of tools and technologies to help with that. Although if anyone has figured out attribution in the room, come see me afterwards. The art part, though, that's really difficult to measure and know if it's any good, isn't it? And history is littered with companies that have made mistakes. My favorite, or maybe it's the most tasteless example, is the beer brand Coors, who took their campaign slogan, which was "Turn it loose," and took that to Spain, didn't talk to any customers on the way in, and when they ran with it, it translated in Spanish as "suffer from loose bowels." So they literally ran a crap campaign. So, sorry, told you it was tasteless. So anyway, my point is there's no excuse in this day and age for making that sort of blunder. And at both LinkedIn and most recently at SurveyMonkey, my teams and I have worked really hard to incorporate customer feedback when we're building out messaging. So for me at SurveyMonkey, a little sort of, I guess, to step back a little bit and tell you about where we are in our journey, we're a company that's 20 years old this year. We have changed massively in the last several years. And in fact, the fastest growing part of our product portfolio is our enterprise platform. But many people don't know that. They think of us as a free or easy to use sort of cheap tool. And so I tasked my team with going out there to figure out how shall we change our messaging and positioning to get this point across. So our starting point, we audited everything that was out there. We then kind of came back to retrenched at HQ. We decided how we wanted to approach the project. We agreed that we wanted to keep the language as natural as possible. We then drafted some statements, some concepts that we wanted to test. We kicked the tires on them internally with a few customers through focus groups, and then we ran a survey. We actually went out to our target audience out in the wild and gave them different statements to react to figure out what was believable, what was differentiated, what made sense coming from SurveyMonkey. So the first step was just landing messaging that we thought would really resonate with the target audience, with our ideal customer profile that we were going after. And then we took it a step further because we knew that we wanted to invest in getting that story out. So we got the go-ahead to spend some money on a brand campaign. But before we funneled money into wrapping buses and putting up our first billboard and doing all sorts of other things, again, we wanted to test the concepts that we were going to market with. So we concept tested the heck out of this campaign. We provided people through a survey with different flavors of bus that they could react to. We changed up the messaging. We had different imagery. We the color was actually the most contentious thing. We had a fierce internal debate about whether green was going to be serious enough for an enterprise and business flavored campaign, and it turned out the green won hands down. So the result of all this, we ran this campaign. Before we ran it, I could walk into our CEO and president and say, hey, guys, here's what we're running with, and here's why. And I had all this data to show them that these, in fact, were the most resonant concepts. And then the tail end of that story, we got the results back from Google last month on the videos that we ran as part of this. And what we found is that we saw 103% lift in search interest in the Bay Area where we ran this campaign from people who saw the videos versus didn't. So to my mind, it was sort of an endorsement for this strategy of getting the feedback and weaving that into your campaign development. All right, next up, think of customer feedback as the ultimate form of data enrichment. How many of you buy services to enrich your leads? Like DataFox, Discover.org, any Lean Data, that sort of thing, right? Marketers have been doing this for many years, right? We know we need to know more about our leads in order to be relevant and reach the right people. I laughed this morning when Karen Peacock, who I think is amazing, was talking about the fact that you should look at what customers do, not what they say. I would argue you actually need both of those together. And companies are winning by taking customer feedback and pairing it up with other operational data and customer data to help their front lines act differently. So in fact, funnily enough, your next speaker, John Herstein, is kind of the hero of this story. Box is one of my favorite companies that I think is doing this really well. So what they did was they took a look at their entire customer journey. They mapped it out, and they looked for places where they could insert what they called at the time listening posts, places where they could ask questions of their customers to better understand how they were feeling about the service that they were receiving and Box and everything else. They then pulled that data directly into Salesforce, which is where their success team lives, which is where their sales team lives. It's the source of truth for marketing campaigns. And what that did was it highlighted for them places where they could serve the customer differently and basically almost know what the customer was thinking when they were picking up the phone and talking to them. So the technology exists today to help you do that. Make sure that you're pulling in customer feedback, pairing it up at the point of service, and delivering a differentiated experience. So don't forget to do that. The third thing that you can do with customer feedback is leverage it for surprise and delight. We're really good at paying attention to new customers, to customers that we're going out and acquiring, when in fact, sometimes if we just paid a little bit more attention to our existing customers and made them feel super special, then we know that we're going to get champions for life. So at one of my previous companies, we had surveys that we ran for NPS and CSAT. We integrated with Slack, so all of those flowed into a channel that I monitored with our head of customer success. And we mostly monitored it to look at the scores. We were looking for outliers in either direction. Fortunately, we had mostly really positive NPS scores. But I was always on the lookout for an extra nugget, an extra piece of information that we could use to surprise and delight a customer. So one time we had a customer who, one of our questions in the survey was, is there anything else that we can do for you to help you be successful? And the customer's glib answer was, well, you could send me ice cream. And so, of course, we had to send them ice cream. And this was actually a Toronto-based customer in the summer. And so, it cost us $25 to send some ice cream, surprise, to their office. And they blew up Twitter. We earned a customer for life, and actually, not only an advocate, but someone that would do referrals all day long. They really believed in the power of the solution. And because we went that extra mile to say surprise and thank you, they really, really fell for us even more. So keep an eye out for where you can do that sort of differentiated treatment. All right, tip number 4, take feedback and turn it into attention-grabbing, lead-generating content. One of my jobs at LinkedIn at one point was running content marketing for Talent Solutions, which was the largest and fastest-growing business. And I think at that point, I realized that when you think about using customer feedback to inform content, there are really 2 types of feedback. that I found that our customers cared about, or our potential customers. One was they were so eager to know what their peers were thinking. At LinkedIn, this led to us launching an annual report called Global Recruiting Trends. They still run this today. They have tweaked the formula a little bit. But the idea was that if you're a head of recruiting, what you want to know more than anything else, apparently, is how your peers' budgets are trending. What are they investing in? What are the specific hot topics that they have their eye on? What's most challenging for them? So we were able to package this into content that ran year after year. We used it for webinars. We used it for conference events, blog content, everything, you name it. We, of course, gated it for lead generation. And so that was an example of using, helping our customers understand what their peers were thinking and doing. The other type of content that customers care about is what their customers are thinking. My favorite example of this was from my days at OpenTable. I was at OpenTable in 2014, 2015. The company had been around for about 16 years. It was well known in this space, but it wasn't really known as a technological innovator as much. And the reality is we were coming to market with some different things people just didn't know about. And at that time, there was a lot of discussion in the industry about the role that technology could play in the dining experience. So things like mobile payments, and were people going to be willing to order their meal from an iPad on a table rather than working with waitstaff. So what we did was we ran a survey in 4 or 5 countries that were most important to our operations. And the survey was, we called it the sort of technology and dining out survey, and build it as a chance to understand what consumers really want from that dining experience. We packaged it together, and we not only got a ton of PR and earned coverage out of it from USA Today and a bunch of other places, but I found myself on stage talking at a conference called MURTEC. So multi-user restaurant technology conference is a thing, ladies and gentlemen, and I had no business speaking at a restaurant conference, but there I was because this crowd really wanted to know what was on the minds of their customer. And so if you haven't already thought about running research or finding ways to help your customers understand their customers, that can be another really powerful way to incorporate feedback and generate leads if you get that content. All right, the 5th one, I'll also draw on a comment from this morning's speakers. So how many of you saw Wade from Zapier and his Fibonacci sequence pricing? That was one of the more creative ways of pricing that I've ever thought about. But I think you have to be thinking about how to incorporate customer feedback into the way that you price. And I think what I see time and again is companies wait far too long to do 2 things when they're launching products. One is to think about pricing, and one is to think about naming. And by the way, naming is probably the most contentious thing of all. So that definitely think about running customer research to figure out how to land the right name. On the pricing front, I've had the opportunity to sometimes work with a pricing firm. So there are specialty firms that are really good at this stuff. Simon Kucher is the one I've worked with a couple of times. And then I've also had situations where I just didn't have the budget because I was at a scrappy startup. Madhavan is one of the partners at Simon Kucher who I've worked with a few times. And his point is that the root of, all innovation evil comes back to this point that companies don't factor in the customer's willingness to pay as they are developing products. So definitely think about how you can do that earlier. I'm guessing that most of you don't have the budget to hire Simon Kucher because it's a pretty hefty 6-figure price tag. So my hot tip for today is to buy Madhavan's book, which is called Monetizing Innovation. It's really good. There's some preamble about the importance of pricing and why companies fail and that sort of thing, but it actually gets to some really practical tips on how you actually can go about pricing. So we used those tips when I was at Lever. We were launching our 2nd paid product. It was called Lever Nurture. And we didn't really know where to start with the pricing. So we followed the tips in Madhavan's book. We came up with basically an interview questionnaire that we would take out to a series of customers. We showed them the concept. We walked them through the same series of questions, including sort of classic pricing questions like Van Westendorp analysis, which is basically, it feels a little strange when you're asking the questions, but you ask questions like, at what price would this be prohibitively expensive for you? And at what price would this just be so cheap that you wouldn't take it seriously? So they feel like weird questions to ask, but we got really, really good data from them. And so we rolled up the data across this series of customer interviews and came up with a price point and launched at that price point. And actually, it worked really well. So again, if you don't have the budget to hire a pricing firm, I would recommend this book. And I think it's chapter 4. I could be wrong, but there's basically just follow that set of instructions and make sure that you pull that voice of customer and real willingness to pay data into your pricing decisions. On a less specific basis, when I was at LinkedIn running advisory groups, we would show a concept basically to a set of customers. And one of the first questions we would ask them is, how would you categorize this innovation in baseball terms? Did we strike out? Is it a single, a double? Did we actually score a home run here? And we would at least get some directional input on whether they thought the innovation was great, and then we would follow that up with pricing questions just to try and figure out where we were in the ballpark. All right, so Fibonacci sequence is one way of pricing. Another would be to actually ask your customers just a little bit of information to make sure you're in the right ballpark. All right, tip number 6, using feedback to create what I would call a virtuous customer acquisition cycle. So I showed you earlier, 60% of people think that marketers are selling them things they don't need. If they don't believe marketers and they don't believe the company, who do they believe? Well, they believe other customers, of course. Our research shows that 82% of people trust the voice of another customer and their experience over the voice of a marketer or the company itself. So I think one of the most successful ways that I've been able to partner with customers really to create that virtuous cycle is by forming advisory councils with my customers. I think I've done this now I did it at LinkedIn, certainly, at a little bit at OpenTable, certainly at Lever, and we're just starting it at SurveyMonkey now. And to my mind, it is such a fantastic way to partner and go to market together with customers who really buy into the value that you deliver. I'll tell you the story of Johnny Sanchez. He was on my second customer advisory council at Lever. The first year, by the way, we basically signed up anyone with a pulse who we thought would be sort of vaguely willing to give us feedback. By year 2, we were getting a little bit smarter about it. And what we did was we looked at our ideal customer profile and the types of organization that we wanted to be building more relationships with. And we went out and we recruited companies that fit that profile so they could help us continue to grow in the direction that we were interested in. So Johnny, at the time, he was the head of recruiting for the clothing store Hot Topic. If you have teenage girls, then you know exactly what store I'm talking about. So basically, Johnny and Hot Topic were like our dream scenario. Lever had grown up by supporting SMB and then was moving into mid-market and was starting to get into enterprise. Today, they operate there quite happily. But back then, we really needed people like Johnny to give us feedback. So we recruited Johnny to join this advisory council. He had some very specific feedback on the way in. And so we realized the importance of listening to Johnny and delivering on some of that feedback. I also agree with Karen this morning that you can't change your entire product roadmap to suit the needs of your biggest customer. But we had to listen and figure out which pieces of Johnny's feedback were mapping the patterns that we were hearing from other customers and which pieces of feedback we were most willing to act on in order to help Johnny, but also help our entire set of customers. Johnny respected the fact that we did that and also came back to him and updated him and kept him in the loop and made him feel heard, basically. That really accelerated our relationship with Johnny. What happened from there was he, along with the rest of the advisory council, became a flat-out champion for us in the market, both online and offline. And the way that software is often bought today, of course, there were hordes of people out there on LinkedIn and on Facebook and on Twitter asking for recommendations for recruiting software. And then the world would just weigh in. It was almost like the question had never been asked before. People would come out of the woodwork to share pros and cons of various software. And Johnny and our advisory council members were always in that string of their own volition, wanting to share their passion for Lever and how it helped them on the recruiting front. He also referred multiple customers to us. He wanted to see more of his tribe using our software. He and the rest of the advisory council all updated their LinkedIn profiles because for them, being a member of an advisory council of a hot software product was kind of a feather in the cap. So what Johnny did overall was, last but not least, he provided indisputable proof that Lever was a platform that scaled. And so it was important for us to hook up with Johnny as a key customer to drive the message forward at Lever. And overall, just making sure that you build those types of relationships with your customer, but you have to listen to the feedback as part of that deal. so that it's not an empty promise and you're giving as well as getting. That's been tremendously successful. Last tip here, making sure that you listen to customer feedback and make it a company priority, because what then happens is your employees start to take notice, and that has a huge impact on your company's trajectory. What do I mean by that? Well, again, we've run the research. We've surveyed people who work at companies where they believe the company has a high degree of empathy for their customers. And when we survey those people, 82% of them believe that they will still be at that job 2 years from now. On the flip side, when we interview or survey people who work at companies where they believe the company doesn't really care about their customers, they don't have a high degree of empathy for them, only 66% of them believe that they'll be at that job 2 years from now. If you think about how hard it is to hire in this economy and retain talent, the more you can bring your employees closer to your customers and help them be exposed to that feedback, the more connected they're going to be to the value that you deliver in the world. One way that we've done this at SurveyMonkey, we've launched something called a customer interaction report. So basically, we have challenged every single employee at the organization this year to publish a cheers. It's a short survey that they complete after a meaningful interaction with a customer. It's piped into Slack for the whole world to see. And in that interview form, they're giving us insight into the products that the customer is using, whether they like them, what struggles they're facing, how we can help them more, any insight at all. And so the act of sharing that and sharing it across the organization brings every employee, I would argue, closer to the customer. So by leveraging that customer feedback, we're really pulling our employees closer to us. So there you go. I got 7 tips for you right there. Of course, this is a session on feedback, so I'm really sorry, but I would love your feedback too. If you just hold your camera phone up to the QR code, that should take you to a short, it's like 5-question survey. There's also a URL on the screen there. While you're doing that, thanks in advance for any feedback you can give me. But just to recap what we covered, ways you can harness feedback in this feedback economy to thrive and grow your business and innovate. Make sure that you pull customer feedback into your biggest messaging and positioning decisions, first of all. Number 2, think of customer feedback as the ultimate form of data enrichment. Pull that customer feedback in, pair it up with your operational data in systems like Salesforce, and your customer success and sales reps are going to be able to deliver a different experience for those customers. Number 3, don't miss the opportunity, those golden nuggets, to deliver surprise and delight by latching on to a small tidbit that your customer tells you to make them feel special. Number 4, high-value, attention-grabbing content often begins with customer feedback. Feedback on how they're thinking about the world, feedback on what their customers are thinking. Number 5, do not make a packaging and pricing decision without talking to your customers. Fibonacci sequence be damned. You really do have to listen and think about that feedback in the context of what your customers are willing to pay. Number 6, make sure that you find ways to build winning relationships with customers and listen to them, thereby establishing a virtuous customer acquisition cycle. The best way I've found to do that is through building customer advisory councils. And number 7, the most obvious thing right under your nose, make sure your employees feel close to your customers and are exposed to that customer feedback so they understand the meaning of what they're doing. All right, I think I'm over time. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck harnessing feedback.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.